Sounds good. All right. Well, thanks everyone for having me. I'm John Bakula from the St. Louis area, and I have been to this meetup before, to where actually I'll be even sharing some of that in this talk, but nonetheless, thanks for having me. And I'm an independent software developer. Been doing this for, been doing development for almost 30 years now. So that might say something on a little bit of the gray in there. Yeah, and the title of this talk is an agile approach to creating documentation and training. The key word in that whole title is the word and recognizing what could be an agile approach. So after this, feel free to send me an email. I'll give you a copy of all the slides. You're going to probably see quite a few. And on the very last slide, I'll have my email address again to where, yeah, just send me an email. I'll send you a copy. Now, before I get into this topic, for one, I'm actually giving this topic or giving a talk on this topic at a couple other conferences that really only have like a half hour. So as part of sending me an email, if you feel like there's something that could be trimmed down, because I didn't take anything out. If anything, I added more content to this. So hopefully we get out of here at a reasonable time. But I purposely left everything in since we don't really have a direct cutoff on time. And yes, if you emailed me for the slides, please give me an idea of maybe like what areas were valuable, most valuable to you, and maybe what areas could be cut, because I have a hard time deciding those things. Yeah, let's jump right into us. But you know, for this being the .NET meetup, I think it is pretty important to kind of share something that's .NET related. So I'll just share a couple little things here. If you had, I'm a big fan of Blazor. So if you're not aware of Blazor United, highly recommend checking out anything that Steve Sanderson's putting out. But Blazor United coming in .NET 8, this is a great quick video of what's coming in this space. So I'm not going to get into Blazor, but highly check out this video for what's coming down the pike. Also, Blazor Train is a good site that Carl Franklin has, where he publishes a lot of videos, not only on Blazor, but just even where Blazor's headed, and just a lot of proactive videos there. Also in the .NET space, WASI, which is also kind of a brainchild of Steve Sanderson. This is almost like a really small way of doing a Docker container. It's a way to deploy apps that might gain some steam in the future. So highly recommend checking this out as well. And the last thing I want to share with the developers out there, whenever this person puts out a video on this YouTube channel of Fireship, if you want to learn about a technology in 100 seconds, this is the channel to go to. He will explain whatever technology and just, so it could be Blazor. I know he has one on Blazor, .NET, Java, and you can see a couple examples on the screen. Highly recommend checking out this person's YouTube channel. And he has a lot of followers already. A lot of people have heard of him, but anyway, just want to share that with the developers out there when you're wanting to get up to speed on something really, really quick. So now into the topic. So there's a lot of popular tools out there when it comes to doing documentation and training. Even feel free to put in the chat, like of some of these tools that you might use or something that's not on this slide. So you might be using a wiki of some kind. Confluence is a very popular, Atlassian's Confluence is a very popular wiki. Balsamiq is great for wireframing, and then Figma has gained a lot of steam. When it comes to doing videos, Camtasia is still the big boy out there on that one. And there's Adobe Premiere. And so there's this handful of tools that we're going to talk a little bit about and how they fit into this mix of agile documentation and training. 3 things I'm not going to talk about. One of them is Dockside Code. So in the agile space, there's this terminology of Dockside Code, and that's where Swagger falls a little bit into that, and so does Storybook. And we'll touch a little on those later, but it's more about how people that do a lot of documentation are almost doing like what they do with code, where they check it into a GitHub or a Git repository, and they're probably using Markdown for creating that documentation. So I just want to clarify up front, this is popular in the Agile space, but this has nothing to do with my talk. So Dockside Code is a way to have your documentation go with your software. And this is also not about writing user stories. So in the Agile space, we work from user stories for the most part. Matter of fact, I see user stories really just flat out getting abused. They should simply follow this format, as I want, so that. And that's really all that should be in your user story. But a lot of us put a lot of this, what should be documentation in a wiki, in the user story itself. So I'm finding, because there's not a lot of good processes out there around documentation, documentation has been falling within user stories for a lot of Agile teams. And the third thing I want to mention that this is definitely not about, this is not about more meetings. So when it comes to the Agile space, they have a lot of different ceremonies, meetings, basically, that are part of the Agile flow of things. And I'm not saying that they're valuable or not valuable. I think it varies really per team how much value comes out of each of these kinds of meetings. But one aspect that I have noticed about different meetings that we do have nowadays is that if there were a better documentation process and a better shared way of doing that and training, I think there would be less meetings as well. So I searched for Google, the images in particular. Documentation sucks. So it was kind of funny to come up with this image of documentation is like sex. When it's good is very good, and when it's bad is better than nothing. I couldn't find anything better that really explains things like that. So yes, if you have something, that's great, but if it's out of date, it really makes things even worse. So we find that when we're developing software in particular, we have a hard time deciding, do we develop more, especially in Agile teams, or do we document more? And this has been a struggle within Agile teams, especially for quite a long time. And this aspect of training, where does this kind of fall on this scale? Is it really just part of the development process where you're expected to always shadow somebody and have a mentor and do pair programming? Is that the training, or should training be part of the documentation process where we're producing more content that could simply be used as training, like within a video form, whatnot? So personally, I work on a lot of different projects. I have to do my share of documenting. And when I'm doing projects where I kind of have control of the documentation, I was really wanting to find a process, find some tools or a tool to where I can create documentation with training content. So I had this kind of question that stays in my mind a lot. It's like, how can I easily create content that others can productively read, listen to, or watch? And there's a couple of key words in here, not really read, listen to, or watch, but the word "or" is a critical word there. So where if you have a lot of stuff, in a written mode, and some stuff in where you could watch it, it's kind of hard to decide which is more useful to utilize, which is more productive. So you want something that's going to be productive for everybody. And as for a content creator, it needs to be easy. Otherwise, it just will not get created. So this is where I stumbled across how we really need to rethink how we use slide-based tools. Whether it's Google Slides, PowerPoint, or Keynote, I'm really finding that there's a trend that in creating content, that they're still kind of doing things in a slide-based way. So there's products out there that are gaining steam, such as Canva, and I'll touch on each of these a little bit later. Descript, and Descript is really cool. You're gonna like to see that. And then there's Mark, which is a markdown way of doing slides. So Markdown is one of those languages that I think a lot of developers like, but a lot of non-developers either don't like or just deal with it. So it's not for everyone, for sure. So in rethinking how we use slide-based tools, what kind of really got me is that, of course, we have slides where you do drawings, animations, you have some kind of visual involved, right? And then you have your notes, you have some kind of description, some kind of transcript about what is on that slide. But there's this aspect of creating content in PowerPoint, and I believe in Keynote as well, and maybe even Google Slides, to where you can produce a narration, like audio or video, as part of that slide. So where in the end, you could take what you produce here and export it to a video. And then there's other ways to export this content into other forms. So having this basis of a slide-based way of doing things, and then recognizing how that information could be shared for documentation or training purposes, has a lot of value. So So the agenda is really kind of give a little bit more of a background, kind of drew me down this path. Let's talk a little bit more about the problem as well. I do want to highlight some of the good parts of using slides, because I know they get a bad rap, especially PowerPoint itself. And I do want to share at the end a step-by-step example with where you could do this today. So a little bit of a background. When I first started creating presentations, for whatever reason, I wanted to create a presentation about PowerPoint because I was kind of new to just doing presentations. And I decided to create this presentation around hacking PowerPoint, kind of give developers of ways to utilize PowerPoint better. In doing so, when I came to actually creating a presentation around some software called NopCommerce, which is a .NET-based open source e-commerce solution, that particular solution, I was able to kind of walk through that entire solution in an hour in a very kind of direct way. So like a 0 to 60 talk, just by showing important aspects of code from the front end to the back end. So that NopCommerce itself is, it's this e-commerce solution. It's a really nice. It's actually probably the most popular .NET-based e-commerce solution out there. It's responsive. It's really well architected. And that's what I would do. I would walk through this architecture through this whole presentation. I gave this presentation at a lot of different meetups and conferences. I was actually in the Chicago area giving this particular talk, and as well as just conferences for NopCommerce itself. In the end, this talk got kind of recognized by the NopCommerce team to where they wanted me to represent them up at Microsoft to really give this presentation because they thought it was very effective. And when it comes to being a software developer and doing more with NopCommerce, I had these different offerings where I was doing consulting, training, coaching, doing less of it nowadays, but nonetheless, training is the area that I wanted to focus on most. In particular, I really wanted to start creating some online training. For what is out there in NopCommerce for this software, they have their documentation, they have their website, with a wiki that's pretty well done. And then they also have a bunch of YouTube videos on their YouTube channel that kind of says the same thing, which, again, it's which should you watch it or should you read the documentation? So yeah, I really wanted to kind of combine these into one way of doing things. So I really wanted to produce something that you could easily, read, listen to, or watch. So let's explore the problem here a little bit more. So accessibility is something that really should be taken a little more serious. I mean, we have taken it pretty serious in the past when it comes to videos and using closed captioning. But there's just other deficiencies that aren't so much called out. For example, I have this deficiency, some of you might as well, to where when I'm creating an email, thankfully, there's this read aloud feature in the email to where there's a term for this, of what this deficiency is, but I always have to hear my emails read to me. Otherwise, I realize I miss words in what I'm trying to articulate. So I always, for a long email, I'm always reading it, having Outlook read it to me. And so it's kind of this deficiency that I have, that these different tools are coming about, especially in the AI realm, that are kind of making things a lot better for everybody. And understandability is a big thing. So I caught this when I was putting this presentation together a while back. I saw Jeff Fritz. He's popular in the .NET space. And he does a lot on YouTube, does a lot of live streaming. And then he sent out this tweet of he's looking at pulling together a book. And then Rocky Lotka chimed in and basically said, well, you could do that, but people that really want to watch videos want you to do videos. The others that are comfortable reading books want you to do books. So there's not a real good happy medium here on producing content, because really we just all learn different. We all have different learning styles that we prefer. Learning preferences is really the better way to think of this. Now, I do want to start with one really good implementation of something that accommodates this. And that is Whispersync. So if you buy a Kindle book and you have the Audible version of that book, if you're listening to the Audible version, it can pick, and you go to your Kindle book, by having Whispersync enabled, it'll pick up where you left off reading, and vice versa. You can read and then go so many pages forward, and you pick up your device and start listening. It'll then pick up where you stopped reading. So that aspect of where you can truly read or listen to the content here is pretty amazing. It's really well done. Now, when we look at other content, especially blog posts, you get a little confused. Should you read and or watch this? So here we have some really good content here. There's a video at the top, and it's a really good description and content about the, for what he's trying to describe. But still, it's, when you look at this, you're trying to decide, do I need to read, or what do I have to read and watch this, or can I choose? It looks like to understand everything that he's trying to communicate here, you'd have to watch the video and read the content more as a reference. Another example of this is Visual Studio Code, the release notes. They'll always do a release party, which is pretty cool, where they have the video out there of all the new features coming in Visual Studio Code. But, their article, does say a lot as well. It's usually a long scrolling article to where you'll have within the article, image or text, and then image, and then text. And then you'll have like an animated image, which is usually really valuable to absorb. And then, text, image, and so on. So this is actually a very popular just way of blogging, where you see the content being produced this way. But again, when you have the video there, should I read or watch it? And lastly, I came across this example today, ironically, and I had to include it. So I came across this article, what runs ChatGPT inside Microsoft's AI supercomputer. Now, in the article itself, if you look really close, you got a little listen button at the top of the article. So yeah, you can press play, and then the text in the article, it'll start reading it to you. That's how you prefer to absorb this content. But then if you scroll down to the end of the article, that's where you have a video. So it just, this aspect of user interface versus user experience is just getting more confusing. I think user interfaces of this content are getting better and better, but the experience of it is something that we really need to start considering if we're trying to produce effective content that could be documentation and training. So when it comes to the Agile space, that's why I wanted to use an Agile approach, because honestly, I don't think there really is an Agile approach. I'm trying to discover one. So where I look to the Agile manifesto, and really that just kind of makes things more confusing. When you look at the Agile manifesto, you have like statements like individuals and interactions over processes and tools. When I see that word over, I kind of think of, and I think a lot of other people interpret this as well, it's more like it says instead of. So like working software instead of comprehensive documentation. Now, I know they were, at the time when they created the manifesto, they were trying to get away from the waterfall method of doing things, and I totally get that. But I think the pendulum is swung maybe a little too far, where a lot of Agile teams just don't find the value of documenting. So looking at these a little bit closer, for individuals and interactions, Jeff Bezos got some notoriety a long time ago. This probably be back in the early 2000s. He made this comment about, he basically banned any presentation tools like PowerPoint and so on for meetings, and that he required there to be a 6-page narrative for everybody to read prior to the meeting and then have a discussion about. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, to where he would ban like a presentation tool. But basically, meetings should be about discussions and not presentations. I would even argue they shouldn't be about demonstrations either. If anything, in many ways, I would prefer not to have to give this presentation. I would prefer to record it like we're doing right now and have everybody watch it and just simply have a Q&A after about this content to make it more valuable. So I think when you're really wanting to have effective meetings, they really should be about discussions. And doing what we're doing right now, sitting through a presentation or even sitting through a demonstration that could be recorded, it feels like that will need to change, especially within organizations where things are time sensitive. And in working software over comprehensive documentation, the different ways to document, there are plenty. So you might be just using different document types, Word, Excel, and so on, and throw them into a document management system like SharePoint. Or you might have a wiki. You might be using Atlassian's Confluence. You might be going the route of creating videos with Camtasia, whatnot, for training purposes. And this is an old screenshot. You might be using Azure DevOps or Atlassian Jira Basecamp, where again, you're probably putting a lot of documentation inside user stories. On the customer collaboration side, one thing I want to kind of share here is I see a lot of times like burn down charts being shared, with stakeholders, and I see, of course, work items, but I don't see a lot of times just the documentation, how the document, because probably it's not happening, but just how the software is progressing at a documentation level. I see that not really getting shared with stakeholders all that much in a curated fashion. They might get random documents emailed to them, but still feels pretty dispersed. And lastly, responding to change. Here's in the Agile space, I think we've gotten a lot of value to where we have work items on the Kanban board to move the work through the process. But really, your work items should be referencing where your documentation is in a wiki. A lot of the platforms can handle this now, and we should be making more use of that. So, I'm looking at these values. I really think they need to kind of be adjusted. So, for example, like working software should be like working software with documentation that provides measurable value. If any of these things don't provide measurable value, you probably shouldn't do them. But I do think that documentation would provide a lot of value to most companies. All right, so we have a Azure DevOps Wiki. Now, we'll be looking at this example a little bit later. And what's nice about a wiki, you can embed pretty easily like videos and images. And this is the gift card example I'll kind of demonstrate later. But the Azure DevOps Wiki is based upon working with Markdown. Now, Markdown is popular. I don't know how much people really like it or not. I know developers do. And I think non-developers, again, just kind of deal with it. But it is a popular way of doing documentation. For those that don't like Markdown so much, they look at something like Atlassian Confluence, and this tool, basically provides more of a WYSIWYG way of doing documentation. Then we have Swagger, and this is kind of out of the box now with our software. So this is documentation that's generated for doing our APIs as developers. So it's not a separate thing anymore. It just kind of comes with it, but it's documentation around how your API works. Storybook. Now this one is, I discovered this on a project that was on about a year or two ago. And this is a way to where you can do components where you can kind of document in a way where you can also work with them and play with them, standardize them. And it's really valuable for teams to understand the universe of what the UI components are available to the different teams within a company. Balsamiq is very popular for wireframing. It's been around for quite some time. Lucidchart, that's basically, it's a lot like Visio. And what I really like about this tool, because I've worked with it on a project to where you're collaborating for the different people that are kind of logged in and looking at the diagram together, you can see each other's cursor. Now, a lot more programs are accommodating this to where when you have multiple people inside that document or that drawing, whatnot, you can then see what they're looking at, and you don't have to even share your screen now. You can just kind of both get in the document and talk things through because you can see each other's cursor. Figma is a way, it's more like a designer tool in my opinion, but some people look at it as a way of documenting something before it gets coded. And to wrap up some of these tools, you got Camtasia for doing video recording. You got ScreenFlow for doing video recording as well. And Adobe Premiere is kind of the big boy out there again when it comes to doing video recording and editing. Within the Adobe space, they also have Adobe Captivate, which is ways to produce video content, and where it is for the purpose of creating training. And this is where something like Adobe Captivate kind of takes you down more the road of learning management systems. Now, you could definitely go down a wormhole of learning management systems because you got Adobe Captivate. Moodle's been around for a really long time. iSpring is pretty interesting because it actually integrates with PowerPoint. LearnDash is a plugin on WordPress. Articulate 360 is a very popular solution. And there's some newer upcomers like Learning Lab LMS that are worth checking out if you're looking at LMSs for something that's a little more modern. But I don't want to go there. You can definitely start going down the wormhole of, okay, if we're wanting to produce documentation and training, let's look at an LMS. I think that's kind of going overboard. It's where you kind of want to look at these different tools that you're currently using for documentation and training and trying to understand more what their best fit is. See, it's not that you really have to abandon any of these tools. You have to kind of really just recognize something like Confluence and your Wiki and Swagger and all that. That's good for documentation material, like reference material, and then Camtasia, those are good for training material. And having a slide-based tool, something like PowerPoint, is actually, I think, something that gets discounted quite a bit on a good place to start, where you want to produce both documentation and training. And technically, the reason for that is that you really can do more than just slides. I mean, for PowerPoint itself, you can export to images, PDF, and even a web page with certain tools. And then when it comes to it, you can export to a video, and then you can share that video through different platforms. And even inside the file itself, if you really kind of look under the covers, if you did an audio narration, you can actually extract those audio files right from the file itself. You can go through an export process. So really, this is a solution you really could read, listen to, or watch. And it's this nice in-between content production tool that a lot of people just discount its value. So understanding the strengths of when you're a consumer or producer. When you're a consumer, you can read, listen to, or watch. And then when you're a producer, you like to either write, speak, or draw. You also find that if you're someone that likes to draw, you might be someone that likes to watch stuff. That's probably more me. If you're someone that likes to write, you like to read a lot. So you have to be aware of your bias, because for the people that are consuming your content, simply may not learn in the same way. And for how you approach what you document, you might take the approach of text first, where you're going to create the Wiki article or the Word document, and then you're thinking about the imagery or maybe converting that to a video. Then you look at, maybe produce an image first, like a diagram in Visio, and then or take some screenshots of the software or whatnot, and then you're looking at the text or turning that into a video. Or then maybe you're going right to video. You're going to go to a screen recording right away, or you might be referencing just a lot of other videos that are already out there that are, let's say, on YouTube to learn something more. And then you're thinking about the text on how you could search it better and the imagery around it. So a lot of us, when we're looking at how you might start on creating documentation, it's rare that you kind of complete. So for example, I would create a lot of diagrams and imagery and screenshots, but I probably wouldn't put much text around it originally because I didn't have a great way of sharing it. So my approach is get a lot of images out there, and get a database diagram, for example. So a lot of developers, they want this database diagram. They want to, have it to where they can pin it up on the wall and have it as a reference and be able to really absorb how the platform works. So this is an example of the NOP Commerce system database diagram that I kind of pulled together. But this doesn't really tell you everything. It just kind of makes you sit and stare. You really do need more said about this reference information. So for example, like with the NOP Commerce, they have this entity ID that you can't just get from a database diagram. So an entity ID is an ID that within the name itself, could be a blog post, a category. So these other tables is what that entity ID could be pointing to. And so there's other tables that have these entity IDs as well. So there's, that's the purpose of an entity ID. There's not a lot of lookup tables inside of that database structure of NOP Commerce. You'll have a lot of ID fields, but there's no lookup table associated. And it's good to know that when it comes to working with the software, that there are enums in the code. So us .NET developers are comfortable with this. You know, you got different enums in the code, and that's what's used to populate those pick lists. Not only that, they use localized files to kind of populate a pick list within a certain language. So you don't get that from a database diagram, you know, when it comes to where did that description come from. Now, lastly, there's XML data stored inside this platform. So what does that look like? And there's, you know, there's a handful of tables out there that store XML data. So this kind of information, you kind of had to experience how I just did to know more about that. Now, there are database documentation tools, but they are really just another tool to create reference material. They're valuable, they're useful, but they're not really helping you create training. So let's talk about the good parts of using slides. I actually had to make this a transition because I did confuse some people. Some people thought there really was a book coming out of PowerPoint, the good parts. So it's just based on JavaScript, the good parts. So going into this, death by PowerPoint, this is a popular phrase. And some people think of death by PowerPoint looking like this, but really, death by PowerPoint looks more like this. It's these slides with just multiple bullet points. Could be on a white background just like you see, but this is what death by PowerPoint really is. And this is what I noticed a lot of people still gravitate to and need to overcome. So you really need to approach PowerPoint or any of these slide-based tools kind of like how you approach really coding in many ways. You know, when it comes to, you know, you're thinking of best practices like clean coding, think of unit testing, think of how you customize your ID. And, you know, one tool usually can't do it all. And there's aspects of, you know, you can never really know enough about any tool. And the simplicity of things is what should be valued the most. And just like how us developers looked at JavaScript way back in the day as kind of like a toy language, I still think of a lot of us look at PowerPoint as like a toy. It's not something really to be explored more. It's just something you might have to do every now and then to give a presentation that's required. But it really isn't a toy. You can do a lot of good stuff with it, better than most tools. So I want to share my top 10 PowerPoint features. So best practices, some take control kind of features that get you more comfortable with it, and some look like a pro features that really make a difference. And then I'll share my game changer of PowerPoint in particular. So my top 3 best practices. Simply one concept per slide or transition. Just stop using the bullet points. If you want to show a checklist of some kind, like, you know, do this, then do that, then do that. Okay, you could probably use your bullet points. Outside of that, just don't do it. Just do more slides. You want to, I say, master the slide master. Get comfortable with what goes on here. Your slide is based upon a layout slide, which is part of a master, which is kind of referenced by master slide when it comes to styles. You can also reuse a slide by making it a layout slide, but a lot of times you'll pick a template that really gives you horrible options and maybe too many options, and you kind of get sucked into that template. Even the different company templates out there are pretty bad to work with when it comes to producing something for documentation purposes. You really want to keep your choices very limited in many ways. You'll notice that most of this, what I've been, is really, for the most part, been a slide where I just have a title. I even question whether I need titles anymore, and just the content area. And I don't worry about, you know, having all these different ways of how a slide could look when it comes to producing something that you're documenting. Let's talk about drawing tools, because I think these are heavily discounted as well. A lot of times I'll even see this to where an Agile team will draw on a whiteboard and someone will take a picture of it, and then that'll go into their documentation, their wiki or whatever it might be. No one will even take the time to redraw this platform that they're all working on. So look at recognizing these drawing tools. A lot of times people will, you know, take something out of Visio and then put it right into PowerPoint, but a drawing like this, where you just kind of put it in there, and then let's say you want to talk more about, how a user story is and an Agile workflow. So you take this diagram and you highlight that part, but you really can't see that. There's simply better ways to do this. And let's kind of walk through an example of that. So let's kind of take that same diagram, but I'm going to read a little transcript here to kind of provide a better experience here. So a user story is a unit of work that moves through the development workflow. One or more tasks can be created for a user story to provide more detail of what needs to be accomplished before the user story moves on to the next stage. User stories can be grouped within a feature, and features can be grouped within an epic. An issue is like a user story, but does not allow for task breakdown. Many organizations don't find much value with the issue work item type, which is true. A bug is also like a user story and allows for a task breakdown. Many organizations use the bug work item type. Overall, user stories and bugs make up the product backlog. Issues are sometimes separated for issue tracking. And finally, epics and features make up the portfolio backlog. So instead of just having a diagram up on the screen and then pointing to different things, having a reveal way of that imagery can be more valuable. Hopefully that was more valuable for some of you out there. And in many ways, you want to have what you're saying about what you're documenting, where the visual is just an assistant of, you want what you're saying about it, what that text is, to be very meaningful, or as meaningful as what you're trying to clarify within this slide of content. I would avoid inserting videos or audio in your presentation. There might be a reason for this, but if you're creating documentation and training, I see where this kind of gets in the way. And I'll a little more detail on that and show you alternatives. One of the alternatives is to use animated GIFs, or if you want to actually have something that looks like a video. This is an example of picking a new template from PowerPoint. You can simply just create an animated GIF. And there's a lot of tools out there to do that. One of them that I use is Screen to GIF. It's free, it's open source, and it's just very easy to use. You pretty much draw around your screen, and you can kind of say what the pixels that you want, and it'll work for you. Or you might need a screen grab tool. PicPic is one that I use a lot. That one's free, paid for if you want to update something like that, but it's really good for grabbing a window or a region. But honestly, I don't even really use this tool anymore. They built this into PowerPoint to where I use it so much to where the select a window feature or select a region feature, I have it on my quick access toolbar nowadays. So I rarely need to go to another tool now for grabbing screenshots. So let's look at some take control kind of features you may not be aware of to get you more comfortable in a tool like this. You can break things up in sections, which is really nice when you have a lot of content. So if I'm basically touting create more slides than bullet points, things get kind of out of hand if you don't have a way to organize these slides better. You also, to get more comfortable with working with the elements in a slide, this is, as a developer, I really like this feature to where you can show the selection pane. So you go to our home, arrange, and then select selection pane. And then you can actually click on the name of things, and then they'll give you a little bit more of a sense of all the different elements out on the screen. And also showing the animation pane. That is really useful when it comes to understanding how animations work. So by showing that, you will also get the indicator of what different, what elements on the UI will animate. So for something that's going to reveal, that's really useful. So this is really what my screen looks like all the time. I'll have the animation pane open. I'll have the selection pane open because sometimes you see groupings of items. And as mentioned, I'll also show the different sections. And I always kind of utilizing the notes for what the dialogue would be. So some look like a pro features. Now, Morph is a feature that's probably getting more and more abused by people, but it's an awesome tool to look like a pro. So what do? You have, like, for example, you have this slide, we got a box drawn around it. And if I'm trying to say how to select Morph, I would take this slide, copy paste to a new slide. And just by doing that and moving that blue box manually to that over Morph, it automatically does that Morph transition. And let's say I wanted to say how to preview Morph. Well, copy paste this slide and move that box over, and then you get this nice visual effect when you use the morph transition. Again, it's something that it's almost getting abused now, but it's still very useful, and you have seen it quite a bit already, I'm sure, in this presentation. Smart art. Now, this is something I probably abuse a lot. I purposely kind of use it for this presentation, just so to demonstrate it even more. So when you have a bullet list, you might be, it's okay to think in bullets first, and then you can work with those bullets later by using smart art for starters. The way that looks is that you have this area where you put a bunch of bullets in, you click on the convert to smart art, and what's nice is that you can just hover over the different selections of what those bullet points would turn into, and it gives you a lot of different choices out there of what you could quickly convert those choices into. And it's also hierarchical. If you have a hierarchical bullet list, there's a lot of choices out there for that as well. So another tool that can, or another aspect of PowerPoint that'll really make you look like a pro, you can do storyboarding inside of PowerPoint. Now, this was something that you had to actually own the Visual Studio Enterprise Edition, which was very expensive in order to have this feature. But now that doesn't exist, and they simply made this free to where you can do storyboarding. So when I mentioned earlier how you have Balsamic to where you can do UIs and draw out wireframes, well, you can do this in PowerPoint now with the storyboarding tool. And the way that kind of looks is that, when you install this add-in, it'll give you a storyboarding tab, and then you can click on the different storyboard shapes. So in this example, we'll just kind of create a new slide. And in creating that slide, you can then drag over a window, like a web browser window, and then you can start adding different controls on there and start doing your mockup inside of PowerPoint, your wireframe. So here's a reference for how to install that, because it's not really obvious. So that I'd share, here's a way to get that free add-in. And there's also more assets out there, more components for storyboarding that you could also install. So those are my top 10 features, or top 9 features. And the game changer for me was what you could do with recording in PowerPoint. So by far, this is probably the reason why, when it comes to documentation and training, why I suggest more and more of using this tool. So I mentioned earlier that I was given this presentation a while back on hacking PowerPoint for developers. Every time I gave the presentation, I actually recorded it through PowerPoint while giving the presentation. So yes, the tens of views out there of these videos, they're out there to be seen. But I really enjoyed the experience of working with PowerPoint instead of a tool like Camtasia, because Camtasia is a tool where you're editing a video, and I didn't want to have to go to that level. I wanted this to be easy. And doing this process of adding a narration is just so doggone easy that it's worth giving it a try. So PowerPoint itself has evolved quite a bit. To the current version, they have revamped this so much to where it is so much better. For a while, they kind of broke things. So if you were using like PowerPoint 2010 versus how PowerPoint works today on recording, whatever PowerPoint version it is, it's just night and day. So the ways that go about it now, you can click on record from beginning. There's also a record tab now, and matter of fact, it's so prevalent now, it's in the upper right hand corner of PowerPoint nowadays. However, the reason I mentioned also why you would not want to add audio or video to a slide unless there's a real purpose for it is that if you are going down this path of creating narrations around your content, then your voiceover would interfere with that video. So it's good to recognize that if you're using this approach. So to record your presentation, the experience has really gotten so much better. It's where you have this teleprompter kind of view where you got what you're saying at the top, and then you got a nice easy record button. And why I say this is so nice compared to something like Camtasia, if you screw up your recording on a given slide, well, you just redo that slide. You're not editing a video, you're just retaking that particular slide, and you can kind of work through your content in an easier fashion. You can do more things with the video, like show blur. This is the teleprompter view. You can also do a presenter view, which is a traditional view in PowerPoint. So it's the tool for recording your presentation has evolved a lot. And then once you do that recording on that given slide or multiple slides, go to put your video down there if you had video turned on. For this kind of content of creating documentation and training, I highly recommend that you don't worry about doing video, just do audio. Don't get influenced too much by the different YouTube videos of people doing, where they're on camera all the time, like I am right now. Don't worry about that. You're more worried about the content itself and having the visual being looked at and just being heard. So when it comes to being heard, there's also the aspect of you don't want to say, look here. You want to have the right transcript of that content. The problem with doing live demos a lot is that you get a lot of dead air, and that kind of distracts from people. And again, your visuals should augment what is being said. So if your text needs those visuals or vice versa, you might want to rethink how those two things are coming together. There's this site I came across about 6 months ago called NarrowKeyed. So I'm going to share more things that are going on in the AI space, this being one of them. NarrowKeyed is a way you can upload your presentation, your PowerPoint presentation, and it'll use your notes, and it'll produce a video for you in multiple languages. It's a pretty impressive tool. I think they charge by the number of minutes of recording that you want produced, but it does a pretty good job of taking your PowerPoint and converting it to a video for you, and using an AI voice. There's multiple voices to choose from to listen to that video. And another solution is iSpring Solutions. I mentioned this one earlier as well, but it's definitely more of an LMS solution, but it does heavily integrate with PowerPoint. And they also have some text-to-speech options. And they have a convert to HTML feature as well, to where you don't have to convert it to video. But this, again, takes you more down the LMS route of these kinds of systems. So let's talk about the evolution of content, because this is where I kind of see things heading in different platforms I've seen, and even things that I'm kind of playing around with myself. So PowerPoint itself, technically has all the different technical capabilities to do more with that content. Even if you looked under the covers within PowerPoint, you could actually take any Office document, tack on a .zip, and then associate it to being a zip file, because that's all really an Office document is a zip file, and you can explore the contents of what's inside of that file if you're inclined to do so. So in this example presentation, I'm kind of showing that you can explore into a media folder. That way you can see the images and even all the audio. So this open XML format really kind of lends itself to where you can extract the data from something like PowerPoint. So yes, technically, I think you could do more with PowerPoint. It could be exported to a web browser, where it's it's like an HTML, CSS, and JavaScript kind of way of working with it. I could even look at an example like what I see on Pluralsight and how that could be generated for something like a PowerPoint, to where you could basically generate this output. But to share a little bit more of what I discovered recently is that of the different images out there, and this has really nothing to do with what I've been talking about with PowerPoint so much, but it's more about how we're creating images nowadays. When you're creating images, you're thinking of JPEGs, GIFs, PNGs, TIFFs, which are referred to these raster images. We have these vector-based images, in particular SVG, that really should be considered more. An SVG image can be exported from PowerPoint. So I did that in this example. I exported the slide to an SVG. And using the developer tools, you can actually explore an SVG and see, the text inside this image is actually searchable. It's selectable. So when you are producing a diagram that has a lot of valuable text inside of it, you should see, and most programs now are offering this, can you export it to an SVG? And hopefully you can, and make more use of those images for your documentation. So I mentioned these Markdown-based tools, and I this particular video, I think, says a lot, to where his argument about Markdown tools, especially for creating slides, they're cool, but are they practical? And are they really that well supported? And my mindset is that, if I'm thinking of stuff visually, I'm not thinking in text so much. I'm really thinking in the drawings. I really just want to draw something out. You can also create text-based ways of drawings using Mermaid. Matter of fact, you can even do this inside of Azure DevOps, to where you can provide a text way of doing this drawing. And there's, again, a lot of developers like this, but outside of that, I don't think a lot of people really care for this. Another way things are starting to evolve is you have Canva. Canva has really gained a lot of momentum of how you can produce content that does have this slide-based kind of feel about it. And they are doing more with AI as well, and doing, text-to-speech and so on. But it's purely a website. It's purely a web app for what you can do there. Descript. So, and kind of seeing where this is all going, I stumbled across this video on Descript, about Descript, where it can use your voice for doing text-to-speech. And not only that, you can then edit the text like if you could even do voice to text, and it'll write out the text for you. Then if you take out your ums and things like that, it will actually remove, not only from the text, obviously, because you're deleting it, but will remove it from the audio as well. So this tool, Descript, is crazy powerful, and they're growing like crazy. It's just kind of funny how that tool is starting to look a lot more like PowerPoint. I don't know how well this tool can really produce, let's say, documentation and training, but this is really just to kind of share where, when it comes to producing documentation and training, a lot of companies are still adopting this unit-based way of doing slides and those kinds of visuals, and then pulling those together. So this way of scrolling through an article that you see almost all the time in blog posts, you got text, image, then you got an animated GIF. We're probably going to start seeing these evolve more so into like more of a parallax effect. Now, this is an effect that you probably have discovered on some web pages, and I'll kind of show this example here on some that I've discovered. So on scroll, as you're scrolling through the article, you see things happen. You just kind of see this, almost what looks like a video, kind of take place in front of you. So as you scroll, you just kind of have these effects go by, and you could then even scroll backwards if you want to have it go in reverse order. So you're controlling, the play on scroll. But something like this, I would even like it if I could just press play. There's also JavaScript libraries out there where it's making this even easier, to where you have a video and you can do more and sync with that video on scroll, to where it'll control the movie, and as well as kind of control the scrolling on the page in sync. So this kind of more immersive experience on consuming content, is becoming more and more available, and you'll see it probably become in more and more products. So yeah, this is a library to allows you to do that animation. The last example I kind of want to show here that I've seen, and I thought this was a good example because this is something that you really could create in PowerPoint because of how animations work. So this again is a web page that on scroll, you see these animations kind of happen. And in this particular example, I kind of scroll down, and then I show kind of scrolling back on how it just all goes in reverse. So let's kind of see a step-by-step example, like how you could do this today. So as mentioned earlier, I was creating some training for NopCommerce, and to where, NopCommerce, this effect where they, you got a wiki, and then you got these different YouTube videos. I wanted to kind of take this example and do something better initially, to where you got, for what you have documented, and for where we have a video, I want to kind of have a better way to consume this content. So I first started off by, creating example of this, how gift cards work in NopCommerce and PowerPoint. And the end result, we'll kind of look at this a little bit closer, to where you have, I was just using Azure DevOps Wiki for an output, but yeah, I just wanted to have kind of this is kind of a raw first pass at what I was creating here, but the video is at the top, and then you have the slides and what's in the notes in the article itself. Now, to step back just a little bit, we have the notes that are kind of put in. I even have some information about when animations occur. So yes, you have animations. It's good to show the animation pane to kind of give you more of that info. And then you record the slide. So from the beginning, and then that will create the a narration per that slide. And now this is the big thing that I wanted to kind of share. If you have Office 365, or what is Microsoft 365, you will most likely have Stream, and automatically with PowerPoint, you'll have this button at the top of your toolbar that says Publish to Stream. So the integration of, after you do your content inside of here and being able to not just export your video, because that's kind of an easy menu option to export the video, but this will not only export the video, but then publish it to Microsoft Stream. So then you could work with that inside of Stream, almost like it's a YouTube video. And then Stream itself actually has some other capabilities of doing the doing a voice to text. So you'll notice it even generated captions automatically here. And then with inside of Stream, I was able to kind of use this share feature and copy paste the embed code inside the Wiki article. So if you're, again, comfortable with using Markdown, this is a way to do it manually. You could copy paste what is in Stream inside of there. It'll show you on the right-hand side of that video. And then I use the tool BrightCarbon to export the text out of PowerPoint, which is an add-in. So that kind of allowed me to kind of basically copy paste a lot easier, all the text from there. And then for Azure DevOps, you can drag drop images inside of there. And then, I was able to also, I purposely wanted to reference the content at the top, like this is the source document for this. And the end result in this example, you had the video at the top. You also recognize that the source document is coming from PowerPoint. And then as you scroll down, you got each image, and also kind of broke things up into where I have like a header, and then kind of like broke up the text around the image itself. So this by far can be done cleaner, but it's just kind of a raw way of how you could do this today if you really wanted to. And where I see this kind of going is that when you really break down this workflow, you first create this in PowerPoint or some slide-based tool, then you decide whether or not you want to use text-to-speech. If you don't, then you record the narration like you can in PowerPoint and Keynote and other tools. Otherwise, you use text-to-speech, in which then that'll be utilized to export the PowerPoint to a video. Then you publish to a video service like Microsoft Stream. And then you export the PowerPoint to a web page. And then you publish the web page to, where it makes sense. You might want to publish your content to multiple, not only just to your wiki, but there's other targets you might want to hit. So really what I'm trying to point out here is that all this really can be automated. And I'm seeing more of this happen to where this is getting automated more and more. To where, in theory, all you have to do is you do all your work inside of PowerPoint and let the automation kind of take care of the rest. Now, I've been playing with this more. This is actually a prototype of something I've been working on to kind of give more of an understanding of this, to where, yes, you have the video in sync with the web page. And I actually have, you can't hear the voice, but it's an AI voice that's going on right now. And then you'll see that the phrases are highlighted with animation below, and that it'll kind of scroll the text as the video is playing. So this is a prototype that I kind of worked up. And what's really cool here is that because of how powerful really HTML5 is now, you can even kind of use the scroll bar in the video to kind of automatically easily scroll through the document itself. So yes, there is a little bit of programming here, but you'd be surprised how little there is to make this happen. So again, this is a prototype that that I've been working on. So how do you get started? First off, hopefully you have a wiki in place, some way of curating content outside of just some general document management system, something that preferably also links to your source code and your work items. And then you got to stop abusing user stories. For if you're within an Agile team, start using your wiki and just reference your user stories to the documentation. And the best way to really kind of, once you have those things in place, start recording. So using something like a SlideBased tool is not natural for a lot of people out of the gate. You might just want to have them just, do a recording like this, and they share their desktop and they show that, and then you take that recording and then you break that into a SlideBased tool like PowerPoint. And by default, you might want to start recording all the meetings where you're getting a lot of what feels like documentation or future documentation that would come out of it. So in summary, there's a lot of other features in PowerPoint when it comes to merging and also the real-time collaboration where you can see multiple cursors inside of the same file at one time. There's just so much has kind of grown there. And what would a demo be nowadays without at least talking about AI stuff? When it comes to what's coming in Microsoft 365 Copilot within PowerPoint in particular, this is really going to make things a lot easier to do things in a slide-based way. In this example, it uploaded a Word document, and that Word document within this Copilot automatically generated these slides. You can then ask it to generate a couple more slides for you, which is pretty cool. You can even then go to a slide and basically say, make it pretty and generate speaker notes for you as well. And you can even look at it's even suggested making an animation. So it took your slide, made an animation. So when it comes to being more effective with your slides, things are really coming a long way, as well as just putting content around your visuals. So things have really come a long way. So overall, I'm working towards, I guess I'm just calling it a PowerPoint SaaS, kind of dogfooding it for some content that I'm creating now. But when it comes to this text-to-speech, something like NarrowKeyed, and even using your own voice to script, some stuff I'm doing there. And when it comes to this interactive web page, like you saw that prototype, as well as really working with SVG images for searchability, and doing something over OneDrive to where you don't have to install an add-in to do this kind of processing. If you're interested in any of this, just send me an email and yeah, see if something like this is a good fit for you. So in summary, know why. I mean, really know why, if this has any value at all. First, recognize, is there a problem that, is your current process working just fine? Whether it's no documentation and doing all the different meetings all the time, is that working for you? Some people might, they really want that alternative to be more effective. So they're not meeting all the time. So when it comes to onboarding, it doesn't take months, it takes days versus, they can start being part of the team sooner than later. It's good to recognize what you tried in the past, because it's good to ask around to see if there's kind of a consensus of maybe, what has been tried, what works, what doesn't work. And then the big question is, what's the risk if you just keep things the same? So one of the bigger risks I can think of is a lot of teams have these lead developers, let's just say, and if that lead developer leaves, well, there goes all that knowledge. It goes right with that person. So I think there's a lot of risk out there by not producing effective documentation. But if you're going to produce effective documentation, training comes right there with it on recognizing what's needed there. So some next steps for yourself. I would try to find an example, record the example, like I said, and then share the example. If you try to just do this without getting buy-in from a lot of people, it'll fail. This is almost like an Agile transformation, to where you do need a little more buy-in to do things this way and get more confidence in that this has a lot of value. So overall, yeah, email me, john@iCompareSolutions.com. As I mentioned earlier, I'm trying to turn this talk more into almost like a 30-minute talk. I know we've gone just a little over an hour. And yes, I would like to know your feedback on what you found valuable and what could I cut maybe out of this talk. And if you want more information or you want to just talk about what might work best for your organization, I'm open for a 30-minute consultation, not to try to sell you anything, but to maybe help identify a good solution for you and your organization. And that's everything. I see a bunch of stuff in the chat that I have not been following, so I don't know if there's any questions in there, if anybody has any questions.
That was a lot of information.
Yes, it was.
Because I'm not a developer
Yeah,
and I'm not very tech savvy. And you just shared with me a lot of things in PowerPoint that I didn't even know were available.
great.
So that was huge for me. So,
That's
because I
great to
love
hear.
PowerPoint. So,
Good.
but what is your favorite tool to use if you're giving, if you're doing a Scrum Master stand up? Would you do a PowerPoint?
If I'm doing a Scrum Master stand-up, so when I'm using, well, when it comes to like the purpose of being a Scrum Master, I mean, that's really you're working with your Kanban boards and things like that. But for the aspect of like if they're starting to gather requirements, I do see a lot of teams go right to a user story and start typing up all these different requirements in a user story. A first step may not be go to PowerPoint. It's at least to go to that Wiki article. So what I'm finding that what I've been describing with PowerPoint is maybe just a little bit too much of a hurdle for most organizations out of the gate. So at a minimum, a Scrum Master, if they're getting new requirements for something, they don't edit a user story. They go to the Wiki, create an article, and then start putting in those requirements there, and then link the article back to the user story. First, get in that path of getting curated documentation in the Wiki. And then from the Wiki, you can make it better. You can do like what I showed, what you could do manually. But the first step is to work towards how can you better curate all of this content. So you're not just throwing random documents in the document repositories, expecting people to search, and starting to think more about how can I create content to where I don't have to be in meetings all the time. And that's where you start going down the video road. And as soon as someone says, let's start creating videos, they're thinking, oh, let's do Camtasia, let's do that. That simple feature of being able to record in PowerPoint is a very underutilized feature and crazy easy to use.
I just renewed a Camtasia license.
Return
Writing
it.
down notes.
And I knew that record was there. I think I've used it maybe once. I don't create as much stuff as I used to anyway. So, but it's good to see the state of the tooling. Do you know if they've got like the same level of background noise cancellation in the tool that they do in like Teams? Because I think Teams and Zoom are both doing great jobs of killing background noise, and where I live, I really need it.
It's good, but you know, the reason I wanted to share more about the AI stuff is that I'm finding more and more that these AI voices are getting really good. And yes, you know, I think if you, for the long term, it's good to recognize what's coming on text to speech. I know that it may not be easy accessible, but going down that path will make this whole process a lot more productive for you and anybody else. You don't have to be the voice, is my point. Matter of fact, even if you had the ability as an organization to where they could use your voice for AI, you don't even want that. You really just want a more standard voice, because what if you leave? Then it's your voice on everything. I think this is going to evolve more, especially with AI evolving so much right now, that the text to speech that's coming in, all these different tools more and more is something to look at closer. So noise cancellation, all that, I mean, it's good. And it's not, I think there is a little bit of that now in PowerPoint on the recording, but I don't know. I think things are going to evolve, just because if you're really trying to produce a lot of content, that in itself of you manually doing the recording will slow you down. It depends on what you're trying to produce.
Yeah, I was thinking more for personal content and stuff where I do want the brand. I hear you though for internal training materials and stuff. Kind of associating
it. Just to get a really good feel for where all this is headed, I would highly check out Descript.com. That is the best example out there right now on how this workflow of using AI voices, whether it's yours or something that's in the platform, how that's evolving. Matter of fact, even like visual avatars. You can create an avatar of yourself if you really want to see your head talking. I didn't get into any of that, but that is definitely coming as well. So, but check out Descript. I think that'll really kind of open things up on how you can produce a lot of content with AI right now. Did I miss any questions? Cool. Yes, send me an email if you want to copy the slides. I appreciate the feedback, and if you want to chat more, yeah, let's set something up.